The mediator looked at me over her reading glasses and asked me to state my name for the record. I said it clearly. Then she looked to my left and asked my wife to do the same. My wife of 31 years straightened her blazer, tucked a strand of gray hair behind her ear, and said her name like she was ordering coffee. Calm. Rehearsed. Like she hadn't spent the last 4 years hollowing out everything we had built together. I want to tell you how I got to that table. Because the story of how I got there is really the story of my daughter, and what she did for me when I was too blind, too tired, and too trusting to do it for myself. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I spent 34 years working as a civil engineer for the county of Maricopa, Arizona. I wore out 3 trucks driving inspection routes. I missed school plays and birthday dinners and 2 Thanksgivings because a bridge deck needed attention or a drainage system had failed somewhere out in the desert. I did it because that's what you do when you have a family. You show up, you work, you provide, and you trust that the person you married is doing the same on the other end. My wife, I'll call her my wife because that's what she still legally was when all of this came apart, handled everything at home. That was the arrangement we made in 1994 when our daughter was born, and again in 1997 when our son arrived. She managed the house, the children, the finances, the bills. I handed over my paycheck and trusted her completely. People ask me now how a grown man could not know what was happening in his own bank accounts for years. And I understand the question. I've asked it myself, lying awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling. The answer is not stupidity. The answer is trust. When you love someone and you have built a life with someone and you believe that person loves you back, you stop looking for reasons not to trust them. You just trust. And sometimes that trust is the most expensive thing you ever give away. She was a good wife for a long time. I want to be fair about that. The early years were genuinely good. We raised 2 kids in a 3-bedroom house in Gilbert. My daughter, who I'll call Renee, was the serious one, quiet, watchful, always reading something. My son was the loud one, always outside, always with a ball or a bike or some scheme that needed explaining. We had cookouts on Sundays. We took the kids to the Grand Canyon and to San Diego and once, when they were teenagers, to Washington, D.C., because my wife wanted them to see the monuments. I worked long hours and she managed everything in between, and for most of it, it was a real marriage. A real life. Things shifted somewhere around 2015. I can see it clearly now. At the time, I couldn't name it. She became quieter in a different way than before, not peaceful, quiet, but closed off. She started spending more time on her laptop after dinner. She joined a real estate investment group that met on Thursday evenings, which I thought was healthy, a good hobby, something of her own. She started talking about a woman from the group named Patricia, and then a man named Derek who apparently had flipped dozens of properties and was very successful. I was working 60-hour weeks inspecting water infrastructure and I was tired and I nodded and said that sounded interesting and I went to bed. I retired in June of 2019. I had been looking forward to it for years. We had a good retirement account. I knew the approximate number, or I thought I did. We had equity in the house. We had modest savings. Not rich, but comfortable. Enough to travel a little, fix up the back patio, help the kids if they needed it. That was the plan I had in my head. What I found when I finally sat down with our financial accounts that August was something I couldn't explain. I logged into our joint brokerage account expecting to see around $280,000. I saw $41,000. I sat there for a long time looking at the screen. I refreshed it. I checked the account number. I thought there had been some kind of error, some kind of fraud from outside. I called the brokerage. They walked me through the withdrawal history going back to 2016. 83 separate transactions. Wire transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. A few large ones, many small ones. Spread out over 3 years so that no single movement would be alarming enough to trigger a call from the institution. I went to find my wife. She was in the kitchen. I showed her the screen. I asked her what happened to our money. She didn't look surprised. That is the thing I keep coming back to. She looked at the screen, and then she looked at me, and she said that the investments hadn't performed well, and that some of the money had gone toward household expenses when things were tight, and that she had been meaning to talk to me about it. Meaning to talk to me about it. For 3 years. About nearly $250,000. I asked about the wire transfers. She said those were investment contributions. To which investments? I asked. She named Derek's real estate group. She said she had believed in the opportunity. She said sometimes these things don't work out. She said it in the same voice she used to tell me the dishwasher needed a repair. I didn't sleep that night. I went through every account I could access. The joint savings account had $3,200 in it. There had been $48,000 in there when I last checked 2 years before. I found a credit card in both our names that I had no memory of agreeing to open. The balance was $24,000. I found another one, $17,500. I found that she had taken out a home equity line of credit on our house in 2017. I had not signed that paperwork. I would not discover until later how that had been managed. The next morning, I told her I needed answers. Real ones, she cried. She said she had made mistakes and she was sorry and that she had been trying to fix it before I retired so I would never have to know. She said Derek had promised returns that never materialized. She said she had been embarrassed and afraid to tell me. She held my hand and cried, and I held her hand back because I was 61 years old and this woman had been my wife for 27 years and I did not know what else to do. I want to tell you about Renee. My daughter was 34 at this point. She worked as an accountant for a mid-sized logistics company in Scottsdale. She had always been the one who paid attention. Even as a child, she noticed things. She would be the one who remembered exactly what someone had said 3 weeks earlier. She remembered dates and amounts and sequences. It was just how her mind worked. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know until much later, was that Renee had been watching for a long time. She told me afterward that she first noticed something in late 2016 at Thanksgiving. She had been helping her mother with some paperwork, just organizing some mail, and she had caught a glimpse of a bank statement. The balance had surprised her. She hadn't said anything at the time. She thought maybe she had misread it. But she remembered it. Over the following months, she started paying closer attention when she visited. Not in a confrontational way. She didn't accuse anyone. She just watched. She was trained to look at numbers, and she started to see patterns she couldn't explain. A new car her mother bought and said was a lease. Renee checked. It wasn't. Small things her mother said about finances that didn't add up when Renee cross-referenced them in her head. In early 2017, Renee started keeping a log. Just a personal document on her computer at first. Dates, things her mother said, inconsistencies she noticed. She started photographing documents when she visited carefully, without making a scene, things left on the counter or the kitchen table. She didn't tell me. She didn't tell her brother. She told me later that she wasn't certain enough yet. She said she needed more than suspicion. She needed something that could not be argued with. When her mother took out the home equity line of credit, Renee found out because a piece of mail arrived at the house when Renee was visiting, and her mother grabbed it quickly, and Renee saw the lender's name on the envelope. That evening, she looked up the lender and found that they offered home equity products. She filed it away. She still didn't say anything to me. She kept documenting for 2 more years. She gathered records carefully and legally, things that were accessible to her as a family member visiting the home. Things her mother said in her presence. Photographs of paperwork that was left out, notes from conversations. She was meticulous. She dated everything. She organized it all in a folder on an encrypted drive she kept at her apartment. When I confronted my wife in August of 2019, and my wife cried and told me she had made mistakes, Renee was not there. But when I called Renee 3 days later, shaking, not sure what to tell her or how, she was very quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, I need to show you something. Can I come over tomorrow?" She came over and sat me down at the kitchen table, and she opened her laptop. I am not going to pretend I handled that afternoon with any dignity. I did not. I am 63 years old, and I sat at my own kitchen table while my daughter walked me through nearly 3 years of documentation, and I cried like I hadn't cried since my father's funeral. Not just because of the money, because of the accumulation of it. Because Renee had been carrying this alone for years to protect me. Because she had been 29 years old, sitting in her apartment, cataloging her own mother's deceptions, trying to figure out how to hand her father a truth she knew would break something in him. She had documented approximately $241,000 in transfers she could trace. She had found the home equity line. She had found records suggesting the account used to open the credit cards, had information on it that was forged my signature, my date of birth, my employment information, listed as current when I had not been employed at that institution. She had taken photographs of a notarized document from 2017 that bore my signature on a transfer authorization. I had never signed that document. That last part that changed everything, that moved this from financial negligence into something else entirely. I hired an attorney. His name was Marcus, a family law attorney in Chandler who came recommended by a colleague of mine. When I sat in his office and Renee opened that folder on her laptop and walked him through what she had, Marcus got very still in the way that experienced attorneys get still when something significant lands on their desk. He asked Renee to walk through it again. He asked her to explain her methodology, how she had gathered what she had, whether any of it had been obtained improperly. She had been careful enough that the answer was no. Everything was either publicly accessible, in her presence as an invited family member, or her own contemporaneous notes. Marcus told me that between the documented transfers, the forged signature, and the fraudulent credit applications, we were looking at potential criminal exposure for my wife. He told me to be prepared for this to become more complicated than a divorce proceeding. My wife hired her own attorney. For a few months, there were negotiations, back and forth, letters and responses. My wife's attorney argued that the investments had been a shared decision and that the documentation was circumstantial. My wife maintained that I had been aware of and had agreed to all of it. The mediation was scheduled for a Wednesday in March of 2021. It was held at a neutral office in Tempe. My wife arrived with her attorney and a composed expression and a story she had been rehearsing, I suspect, for the better part of a year. She had been preparing for a version of that room where the dispute was about failing investments and marital disagreements and who had agreed to what. She had been preparing for a long negotiation. She had not been preparing for Renee. Renee sat beside me and Marcus. She had her laptop and a printed binder organized by date. The mediator introduced everyone and explained the process. My wife's attorney began with an opening summary that presented the financial losses as the result of mutual investment decisions made in good faith. Marcus responded calmly. He said we had documentation that told a different story. He asked permission to present it. The mediator agreed. Renee opened the binder and began at the beginning. She was composed in a way that I think surprised everyone in that room, including my wife. She walked through each documented transfer, the dates, the amounts, the destination accounts. She presented the home equity line. She presented the credit card applications. Then, she got to the 2017 transfer authorization document. My wife had been watching her daughter with an expression I have turned over in my mind many times since then. It wasn't guilt, exactly, at first. It was more like calculation, trying to figure out how much Renee actually had, trying to estimate the damage. But when Renee placed a copy of that authorization document on the table and explained that a forensic document examiner had reviewed the signature and produced a written opinion that it did not match my authenticated signature samples from the same period, that was the moment the calculation stopped. My wife looked at her attorney. Her attorney leaned over and they spoke quietly for a moment. Then my wife looked at Renee. Not at me. At Renee. She said, "Where did you get that?" Renee said, "It was on the kitchen counter, Mom. In 2017, I was helping you sort mail after Dad's birthday dinner. You left it there. I photographed it." My wife stood up. She said she needed a moment. Her attorney reached for her arm and said something quietly. My wife sat back down. But something had changed in her entirely. The composed expression was gone. What replaced it was something I recognized from 31 years of marriage, though I had never seen it in a moment quite like this. It was the look of someone who had been caught so completely that there was no longer any useful direction to run. The mediation did not resolve that day. It could not. The document examiner's finding, combined with the totality of what Renee had assembled, meant that we were no longer in purely civil territory. Marcus filed a report with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. The forged authorization document and the fraudulent credit applications were referred to the county attorney's office. My wife was ultimately charged with forgery, fraud, and theft. The criminal process took another 14 months. During that time, the divorce proceeded. Because of the documented fraud, the asset division was handled with that context fully in view. The judge overseeing the divorce was unambiguous. What my wife had done was not a mutual investment failure. It was a systematic financial exploitation of a spouse who was working full-time and trusting her completely. I was awarded the house free of the fraudulent home equity lien, which was voided as part of the proceedings. I was awarded the remaining retirement assets plus a judgment for a portion of the documented losses. I will not recover everything. I know that. Some of that money went places that cannot be fully traced, and some of it is simply gone. But I am not destitute. I have my house. I have my retirement. I have enough to live on without working myself back into the ground. My wife pleaded guilty to 2 of the charges to avoid trial. She was sentenced to 4 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections with credit for time served in county and eligibility for release after serving 85%. She is there now. I want to tell you what that Wednesday in March felt like, sitting at that table, watching Renee present what she had built over nearly 4 years of quiet, careful, lonely work. I kept looking at her and thinking about that 29-year-old girl sitting alone in her apartment in Scottsdale, photographing documents she wasn't sure she would ever need to use, building a case she wasn't sure she would ever have to show anyone, carrying the weight of what she knew because she loved her father and she did not know what else to do with it. She never confronted her mother. She never tipped her hand. She just kept watching and documenting because she had decided that if it ever came to a moment of truth, I was going to have something real to stand on. She gave me that. When everything else had been taken from me, the retirement I had planned for, the version of my marriage I had believed in, the future my wife and I were supposed to share, Renee made sure I still had the truth. I asked her once, after the dust had settled, why she didn't come to me sooner. She said she had thought about it many times. She said she was afraid that if she brought it to me before she had enough, her mother would find a way to explain it, and I would believe the explanation, and nothing would change except that her mother would know she was watching. She said she needed to be certain. She needed it to be undeniable. She was right, and it cost her something to be right. I know that. She has had to work through her own grief about her mother, her own complicated feelings about a woman who was genuinely her mother and who also did something genuinely harmful. Those things coexist in her. I see it when the subject comes up. She doesn't talk badly about her mother. She just goes quiet. The same quiet she had as a child, sitting in the corner of the living room, watching everything, remembering all of it. My son has had his own process. He and his sister are close. He was angry in the beginning at his mother, and honestly for a while at Renee, which I understand, because she had known things he hadn't, and that creates its own kind of wound in a sibling relationship. They worked through it. They're good now. Better than good, actually. I had them both over for Christmas last year, and we played cards in the kitchen until midnight, and I thought that whatever I lost, I did not lose the most important things. I retired 2 years ago for real, which is to say I retired the second time, because the first retirement dissolved along with everything else. I did some part-time consulting for 18 months after the divorce, enough to pad the recovery, and then I stopped. I take walks in the morning. I read more than I have since I was young. I have a small woodworking setup in the garage that gives me something to do with my hands. I am not going to tell you that I've healed completely. I don't know if that's the honest word for where I am. I think what I've done is accept it. I accept that my wife was capable of something I did not believe she was capable of. I accept that I spent 31 years with a person I did not fully know. I accept that trust and love do not guarantee safety. Those are hard things to carry, but I carry them now without breaking. What I will tell you is this. If you are managing your household finances alone, or if someone else is managing them while you look away because you trust them completely, please take an afternoon and look at your own accounts, all of them. Know the names and the balances. Know where your retirement lives. Know what is in your name and what is in your spouse's name and what is in both your names. Not because the person you love is lying to you. Probably they're not. But because you deserve to know the shape of your own life. Because that knowledge is yours, and no one should be the sole keeper of it. And if you have someone in your life who is quiet and watchful and who pays attention the way Renee pays attention, tell them you love them. They may be carrying more for you than you know. Renee came over last Sunday with her husband and my 2 grandchildren, who are 4 and 6 and completely indifferent to all of this history. The 6-year-old wanted to see the woodworking shop. I showed him how the lathe works. He asked if he could make a sword. I told him we'd work up to that. After they left, I sat on the back patio and watched the sun go down behind the McDowell Mountains, the way it does in late October. All orange and deep pink across the desert. I thought about what it took to get to that patio, to that evening, to that specific quiet. I thought about Renee at 29, with her laptop and her encrypted drive and her decision to do the careful, unglamorous, lonely work of telling the truth before she even knew for certain that the truth would be needed. I got the truth. I got justice. I got my daughter. I kept the most important things.